The vastness of the Arctic does not simply kill you. It consumes your sanity and strips away your humanity. I'm Captain Levent, and this is the log of the ultimate betrayal, the price paid for the impossible dream. Our subject is Sir John Franklin's doomed expedition of 1845. A fleet of 129 men swallowed by the ice while searching for the Northwest Passage. History records starvation, disease, and the horrors of cannibalism. But the real story is about the entity of the North that demanded the ultimate sacrifice. The expedition was a symbol of British might. Two formidable warships, the Erebus and the Terror, built to withstand the ice, packed with 3 years of provisions, led by the celebrated but aging Sir John Franklin. The mission was not just discovery, it was a conquest. They entered the Canadian Arctic archipelago full of confidence, unaware they were sailing into a realm governed by forces older than ambition. The ships entered the ice pack near King William Island in September 1846. They were not caught by a blizzard or a random shift. The freeze was immediate and absolute. The ice around the ships did not look white and crisp. It was dark, almost black, and pulsed with a faint internal glow. The ice was not trapping the ships. It was holding them fast like a predator that had finally cornered its prey. The men realized they were stuck. The first winter was grim. Soon, the crew began to suffer intense, inexplicable illnesses, severe weakness, and mental confusion. History blamed lead poisoning from the canned food, but the logs whisper a deeper horror. Many cans, when opened, were already empty, or filled with a sickening gray sludge that tasted of ash. The Arctic had poisoned their sustenance before they even left England. The long Arctic night descended, bringing with it a psychological terror. The crew began to hear voices in the darkness outside the hull. Not the familiar crack of ice, but low, sibilant whispers carried by the freezing air. The whispers didn't speak of rescue or hope. They spoke of survival's cost and the debt owed to the ice. Sir John Franklin, the expedition's backbone, died in June 1847. The official cause was illness, but the crew suspected despair. His final, ragged log entry described a terrifying vision, the ice surrounding the ships rising into colossal figures, demanding that the mission be completed, but only by those strong enough to pay the price. Command fell to Captain Francis Crozier from Federer and Captain James Fitzjames from Erebus. Fitzjames, noted for his confidence, began keeping a private journal written in code. His secret entries detailed the growing supernatural influence. He observed that the crew of the Erebus, his ship, was oddly resilient, showing less illness than the Terror crew, but exhibiting aggressive, possessive behavior over the dwindling supplies. The two ships began to drift apart slightly. The Erebus remained unnervingly still and silent, while the Terror seemed to moan and groan constantly, as if struggling against the ice. It was a separation of fates. The entity of the North had chosen the Terror for its slow, agonizing death, while the Erebus was being groomed for a different, darker purpose. In April 1848, the decision was made to abandon the ships. A log entry found later near the Terror described the final, horrific scene. The remaining Terror crew, driven mad by hunger and illness, had begun to eat the lead scraped from the ship's hull, hoping to fill their bellies with anything heavy. They were already too far gone. The 105 surviving men abandoned the ships, dragging lifeboats and supplies across the ice toward the mainland. They were not guided by maps, but by a chilling, persistent compulsion to march south. The whispers of the ice, which they called the Huntress Call, were now a siren song. The retreat was a slow-motion disaster. The first bodies were found months later by rescue teams, strangely posed. They hadn't fallen naturally. They were arranged in small, defensive circles, their faces staring up at the empty sky. The true horror wasn't death. It was the method of their demise. Years later, autopsies on the remains confirmed the grim history, cuts and fractures on the bones. Consistent with cannibalism, history blamed starvation. But the Captain Levent theory is different. The Arctic entity, the hunger, had successfully twisted the survivors' minds, ensuring their survival was based purely on consuming their own kind. In New Testimony, often dismissed by European explorers, was the key. They spoke of the pale men marching south. They reported seeing the sailors carrying fresh meat in their bags, even though they were hundreds of miles from any game. And they reported seeing two distinct groups, one sick and dying, the other healthy, terrifying, and always watching the first group. The expedition had splintered. The sick and weak were allowed to starve. The fit men, primarily from the Erebus, had adopted a chilling survival strategy dictated by the Huntress Call. They were now actively harvesting their companions to maintain their own strength, sacrificing humanity for mobility. DNA analysis years later confirmed Captain Fitzjames's bones bore marks of cannibalism. But Fitzjames was not the victim. He was the leader of the strong group. His private log, never fully recovered, likely detailed his cold, calculated decision to become the entity's agent, the hunter, to ensure the survival of his core crew. Decades later, when the ships were found, the horror was still palpable. The Erebus, found submerged, still contained its crew's personal effects, but the terror, found intact, was frozen in time. A clock on the wall was stopped at 3 a.m., and the galley still held prepared food, not lead poisoned, but perfectly edible, proving the men were not out of food when they abandoned the ship. The food was a trap. The entity did not want them to starve. It wanted them to choose the deeper sin. The fully stocked larder was left behind because the hunger whispered. That simple survival was not enough. It demanded the flesh of their friends. They chose the frozen death march over the available provisions. The most unsettling find came from the Terror's engine room. Divers reported that the engine itself was undamaged, yet the ship was unable to move. They found deep, wide gouge marks on the steel of the engine housing, as if the ship itself had tried to tear the engine out in a final, agonizing struggle to break free of the ice's grip. The ultimate twist lies in the purpose of the tragedy. The Franklin expedition was not a failure of men or supplies. It was a successful sacrifice to the Arctic entity. The tragedy provided the North with 129 damned souls, condemned to march and feed forever. The whispers heard by the crew were not internal. They were the Huntress Call, now broadcast across the Arctic. Today, the wrecks of the Erebus and Terror are protected, yet divers report feeling an unnatural cold inside the hulls, hearing faint, echoing whispers that speak of flesh and survival. The ships are not tombs. They are monuments to a successful damnation. The price of the Northwest Passage was paid, not in gold, but in souls. The tale of Franklin is the Arctic's purest horror. It confirms that the greatest peril in the cold is not the ice or the distance. but the terrible choice forced upon the isolated mind by an ancient, hungry force. The ice demands the soul, and Sir John Franklin's men paid the bill with their humanity. The Erebus and Terror still sail in the eternal ice, crewed by the shades of the lost. Their final march a warning to all who dare enter the north. They are the Arctic's greatest failure, and its most terrifying success. If you enjoy these deep-sea mysteries, remember to like and follow. A new voyage awaits in the next chapter of this channel.